In 1847, a doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis figured out that hand-washing could stop women from dying in childbirth. It should have made him a hero. Instead, doctors were so offended by the idea that he ended up committed to an insane asylum, where he died 2 weeks later of the very kind of infection his own discovery had prevented. This isn't medical folklore. It's a documented, verifiable case, recorded in hospital mortality logs and the doctor's own increasingly desperate writing. This is the true story of the man who discovered hand-washing and what it cost him. Vienna General Hospital, 1846. The maternity department was split into 2 separate clinics, and every pregnant woman admitted to the hospital knew exactly what that split meant for her chances of survival. The first clinic was staffed by doctors and medical students. The second clinic, just down the hall, was staffed by midwives, and the death rate in the first clinic from a condition called childbed fever, a violent infection that could kill a new mother within days of giving birth, was roughly 3 times higher than in the second. Women knew it. Patients begged hospital staff to be assigned to the midwives' clinic instead. Some women, in documented cases, chose to give birth in the street rather than be admitted to the doctor's ward, because a woman who delivered her baby outside the hospital and then checked in afterward was statistically safer than one who delivered inside it. Ignaz Semmelweis, a young Hungarian doctor working as an assistant in the first clinic, couldn't explain it. Doctors were more trained, more skilled, more scientifically advanced than midwives, and yet the ward run by doctors was killing women at nearly 3 times the rate. Something about what the doctors themselves were doing was the problem. He just didn't know what yet. The answer arrived through tragedy. In 1847, a colleague of Semmelweis's named Jakub Kolečka was accidentally cut with a scalpel while performing an autopsy. Days later, Kolečka was dead, and his symptoms, Semmelweis noticed, matched childbed fever almost exactly. Kolečka had never given birth. He'd cut himself during a dissection. Semmelweis put it together. Doctors in the first clinic routinely performed autopsies on patients who had died, often just hours before walking directly into the maternity ward to examine living women in labor, without washing their hands in between. Midwives in the second clinic never performed autopsies at all. Semmelweis theorized that doctors were carrying invisible cadaverous particles from the dissection room straight into the birthing bed on their own hands. He had no germ theory to explain why this worked. Germ theory didn't exist yet. But he had a method that might stop it. He ordered every doctor and student in the first clinic to wash their hands in a chlorinated lime solution, chosen simply because it was known to remove the smell of decay, before touching any patient. The mortality rate in the first clinic collapsed almost immediately, from around 18% of patients to under 2%. In some months, it matched or beat the midwives' ward entirely. He had solved it. He had the data to prove it. The medical establishment didn't want the answer he was offering. Semmelweis couldn't explain the mechanism. There was no accepted scientific theory yet for invisible particles causing disease, and to many senior doctors, his findings carried an unbearable implication, that they, personally, with their own unwashed hands, had been killing their patients for years. Prominent doctors across Europe rejected his data outright, some mocking the idea that a gentleman's hands could possibly be considered unclean. Semmelweis didn't handle the rejection well. Rather than winning colleagues over with patients, he grew increasingly furious, writing open letters that directly accused obstetricians who refused to adopt hand-washing of being, in his words, murderers. He alienated the very people whose support he needed. His contract at Vienna General Hospital wasn't renewed, and he returned to Hungary in professional disgrace. In 1861, he published a lengthy book laying out his full findings, The Etiology, Concept, and Prophylaxis of Childbed Fever. It was rejected and dismissed by most of the medical world he'd hoped to convince. Over the following years, colleagues and family noticed his behavior growing steadily more erratic, mood swings, memory lapses, outbursts that alarmed even those closest to him. The exact cause remains debated by historians to this day. What isn't debated is what happened next. In July 1865, Semmelweis's wife and a colleague arranged for him to visit a medical facility in Vienna, telling him only that they were going to see a new institute. It was an asylum. When Semmelweis realized what was happening and tried to leave, he was forcibly restrained by the asylum's guards and committed against his will. He struggled during the commitment. In the process, he sustained an injury to his hand, possibly from a beating by the guards restraining him, according to multiple historical accounts. The wound became infected. The infection spread into his bloodstream. 2 weeks after being committed on August 13, 1865, Ignaz Semmelweis died of sepsis, a raging bodily infection at just 47 years old. It was, almost precisely, the same category of infection that had been killing new mothers in the first clinic before he ordered doctors to wash their hands. The man who discovered how to prevent that kind of death died from it himself, inside the very system that had refused to believe him. Less than 20 years after Semmelweis's death, Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister independently developed and popularized germ theory, proving with the microscope exactly the mechanism Semmelweis had never been able to explain. Hand hygiene became one of the single most foundational practices in all of modern medicine, credited with saving more lives across history than almost any other medical intervention. Semmelweis's name lived on in an unexpected way. Psychologists eventually coined a term for the specific human tendency to reject new evidence because it contradicts existing belief even when the evidence is overwhelming. The Semmelweis reflex. He was right the entire time. He had the data, the results, and the method, years before anyone understood why it worked. It cost him his career, his reputation, and eventually his life. Semmelweis sighed, "Wash your hands." They locked him away for it. Today, it's printed on the wall of nearly every hospital on Earth. Subscribe if you want more. See you in the next one.